So, thank you everybody for coming today, and thank you very much to the MMConf organizer for having me here today. I have been a developer for approximately 15 years, and my main passion during this time has been just to create software. But in the last year, I have become kind of obsessed with the implications of the technology in the long term. How is technology affecting humans' destiny? Not in a short period of time, but in the next, 50 years. And this talk will be probably less technical than any other in the conference, potentially confusing, and I confess that I don't have any clear advice for the future or even a very precise forecast. And I don't think anyone has a clear view how it's going to be the technology in 2050. Because, the speed is so fast that, there is very, very few methods to forecast that. So my only goal today is just to give you some starting points to put in the last 5-10 years in context and hopefully start a conversation about the long-term implications of us creating more and more data all the time. And in particular, I would like to talk about our memories, historical records, and the information legacies, all the information that we have been generating in the last millennia. And we have migrated from a physical space to a digital environment just in a few years. And that brings us a few different things. Good things, that is good, mainly, because that gives us the new abilities to record more information in a more universal way. But it's too open door to new challenges and new questions in topics like privacy or reliability for the future or format. So I will start from the very beginning, and I would say that we have been cyborgs for 2 million years. Because in the amazing journey of mankind's evolution, we have been creating tools all the time. First, it was the hand axe, and the stone knives, and the bow, and the arrow. We have been just creating tools all the time. And that was one of the main foundations of our prosperity. We create them, and we have better lives. And we have been just creating tools all the time. But we shouldn't be just thinking that even if it is tempting, the only tools that we have are the physical ones, because it's not. There is a very important tool that we have developed for millions of years that is called story. We create stories. We have created the myth. We have created the saga. And we have created the epic poem. And even the legend. And over millennia, long before we had even a written symbolic system to capture all the knowledge of our society, we have been just transmitting this information orally and verbally, just with our language and with our voice. So, using Steve Jobs' words, before we have a bicycle for the mind, we just created mirrors for our brains. We just created the language, and it was a mirror to ask about ourselves. And as our understanding of the complexity of the reality has been just increasing, we need better tools. We need more things that can capture the information that is just in our environment and just put it in a way that can be just passed on to our sons, to our grandsons, great-grandsons, and so on. And it was important for historical reasons, just to know who we are. But it was important too for practical reasons. Like, for example, you need something to know how many days till the next ritual, till the next sacrifice. So you don't have to remember exactly how many days. So this is the Ishango bone. It's probably the oldest, not totally sure, but probably the oldest mathematical device in history. It's like 20,000 years old, more or less. It's in permanent exhibition in Brussels. And initially it was thought that to be a tally stick. So it was basically an animal bone, and you make notches on the bones, and you were just recording different quantities. But after microscopic inspection, they discovered that they have this kind of very specific amount of notches that were just used for multiplication. So if you wanted us to record how many are just 5 multiplied by 2, you just make 5 notches, and after that 10 notches. And you don't have to count again. You don't have to make the operation again. You can just count the notches. So that was, in many ways, one of the first devices, very primitive, to record information and to calculate. But that was approximately 20,000 years ago. And we have storage, we have computation, and we have self-tracking. Because another interesting thing about this device is that it's just covering a 6-month lunar calendar. And that was used in all times for women just to control her menstruation. So they can just know exactly how and when it's going to happen. So there is this kind of primitive things that still are just giving us some insight about our needs for information storage. This is a quipu, and it's a fantastic, incredible device. It was used by the Inca Empire to record the tributary and financial and commercial records. So basically, you have to record how many cows someone has to pay in taxes. You can just use this device to record that information. And the layout is quite simple, but it's quite funny too. You have a primary cord that is basically used like a support for all the rest of the information, and you have these pendant cords that are containing small knots that usually are simple knots. And a simple knot represents the number 1. So if you want to represent, for example, the amount 3,000, you basically put 3 knots in the first string, no knots in the other third, and the other 3 ones. And if you want to represent 8,210, you put 8 knots in the first one, 2 knots in the second one, 1 knot in the third one, and no knot in the fourth one. So that is interesting. But in 2004, Professor Gary Urton from the Stanford University was just inspecting one of those quipus, and he realized that there was some kind of hierarchical accounting information on them. They were basically a spreadsheet. So you just take one level, and all the numbers that were just represented on the first level, you can sum up all of them, and you got like these higher up totals that you can just check. So instead of just going through all the detail of the taxes that a city has been paying for the last 2 years, you can go to the totals. So this is basically Excel, but Excel like 400 years ago. So there was additionally another very interesting thing. There was the what is called introductory segments. And they were basically special notes that were at the beginning of the quipu. And they were basically used, or the current interpretation is that they were basically used for indicating the origin of the quipu. So basically, you just put like 3 double knots. That means Puruchuco. If you just put 4, it will be probably another city in another place of the Inca Empire. So again, we have geolocation, 3 diagrams, base 10 encoding, spreadsheets, and bookkeeping 400 years ago. So, it's nothing new. We have a historical need for transfer information and stories and our memories. And in many ways, the way that we have been just evolving our technology is by looking for new, more universal, and more cheap ways to transfer that information. So, like big milestones in this journey, the books, the telegraph, the telephone, but there is one physical manifestation that shows how far we have come in this quest, and that is the mobile phone. Because cell phones have spanned from high spending classes to proletarian levels faster than any other technology in history. Today, we have around 6 billion subscriptions to cell mobiles. And that's not exactly 6 billion people, because there are people that have many subscriptions, but still, it is accepted that 80% of the global population is just in contact with this kind of technology. And we have people that can read, but can't use a telephone, a mobile phone. And with this kind of universal access to technology, it comes to an almost universal ability. That is the ability to record anything. And we are doing that all the time. You can just go to the office and start an app like Runkeeper and just keep track of every single point that you have been just going through, and the times, and the speed, and the average speed, and many multiple details. And we are doing this all the time. You are just going in your bike, and you are just probably updating Facebook. You are just in a meeting, and you are just making some tweets because it's super boring. And you are just having your lunch, and you are just Instagramming that because it's super important, and so on and on. And we just record and store and quantify all the time. It's something inside us, just telling us just to keep our story. And that is interesting because we have been just creating tools for that through history, but it's especially interesting with mobile devices because, as Brian was just commenting yesterday, they are just packed with different sensors. And the sensors are not just waiting for you. They are sensing all the time. They want to engage with reality. They are designed to engage with reality, to connect with any signal. And as we just keep just getting more information with the sensors, each one of us become just more unique. We are just so specific. We have quantified to such a low-level detail that we are just becoming unique in many ways. So maybe we are just all watching YouTube videos like Harmland Shake or whatever, and we are just watching all this kind of stuff. But when we just start just keep tracking of personal information, of the quantified self, of all these kind of sensors, we become very unique. And in fact, we are just becoming so unique that it's amazing what we can do with data. Just 1 month ago, there was these guys in the MIT publishing this paper, Unique in the Crowd, the Privacy Bonds of Human Mobility. And it was based on the idea that as you just go through the city, your mobile, even if you are not making a call or getting a call, your mobile is just trying to connect to the cell towers close to you in order to provide the best connection all the time. And each one of these interactions are just being recorded by the telecom companies. They are just being stored in a database. And they provide anonymized information to these guys in the MIT of each one of these interactions. It was a massive amount of data. It was 15 months in 2006 at 2007, 1.5 million users, and 2.5 billion interactions. Anonymized. There was no personal information. Just one phone, we don't know which one, is connecting to this tower at this time. And they were just making a very interesting question, like, how many data points do you need to characterize a user? Even if you don't know that this mobile is, the mobile of a specific person, you know that this mobile is all the time the same through different points in different locations. And I would just like to ask you to take a guess. How many data points are needed for creating a fingerprint of each mobile? 30? Any other guess? Sorry? 3? Almost 4. In a massive data pool of 2.5 billion data points, you only need 4 to discover that a user is, these specific locations and these specific times. And, that is interesting in many ways. In some ways, it's kind of It's cool because we just can learn a lot about our users, and we can improve our infrastructures thanks to that. But it feels like, we are just sacrificing something. Like, the new gods are exactly the same way that the old gods were. They are asking for sacrifices. And the new one is privacy. You have to sacrifice your privacy for all this technology and all these cool things. But that is an ethical problem. That is a moral challenge, a political issue. But that is not a historical problem. If you have a lot of data, like big data, huge data, colossal data, like the cloud is just pouring data of humans. If you have that, that is perfect for someone that is just looking back in history, trying just to make an accurate representation of what happened. But it's funny, it's kind of a paradox that at the same time that we are just becoming more unique because we are just capturing more information about ourselves, we are just becoming at the same time equal. Databases don't care about gender. File systems don't care about age. We are all the same in the databases. And that is interesting because it's a paradox of even if we are just taking care of just creating a more accurate representation of our lives, maybe we are not. And this is a very interesting example. Coach Cachet is a very funny app that helps you to pretend that you have a social life that is more interesting than you really have. It basically creates fake check-ins for you in Foursquare. You connect your Foursquare account to this app, and you will probably be in your home, like boring in a Friday's night, but you will be probably having in your virtual representation a super splendid fancy dinner in a fancy restaurant. And this is interesting for me for two reasons. The first one is that we are becoming our digital self. That is not secondary anymore. You think about all the people that you know in social networks, most of them are not in physical contact with you, not at least every day. And so for them, everything that you put in the social networks are basically your true representation, your canonical representation. And the other point that I found really fantastic about this idea, that is basically a joke, the kind of joke that only nerds can implement and enjoy, is that it demonstrates that it's becoming very hard to tell what is real and what is not, and what is fake and what is not. Because if you go to your Foursquare account, you will see just all your stream with the different updates, with different check-ins, and they all look the same. There is no difference in the database, in the representation. Everything is the same. So that is just happening everywhere. And it's not, a problem with technology itself, because we have been just creating fake documents for millennia, for thousands of years. But it could be very difficult in the future to say what is real and what is not, because the tools for just making fake data that is very realistic are just becoming, ubiquitous. Like, for example, in 2011, Facebook introduced this option just to post updates in the past. So I can say that I was just a very close friend to Fidel Castro and Camilo, and that we were in La Habana in 1959. And, it's obvious for my friends that I was not. But in 100 years, I don't know how clear that is going to be. Especially if it is not something as relevant as this, but something more, specific, something more not that important. It's going to be very difficult just to separate reality from, fiction. And in the past, the effectiveness of these all fabricated artifacts, you rely on the ability of the creator to make them look real. But in the future, maybe it's going to be more about the context. You put a fake information in a real context, surrounded by real information with real names, maybe it's not going to be a very clear way to tell what is true and what is not. But there is one very simple question that is predating all these obsessive ideas that I have in my head. That is, who is the data holder of all this information? Because historically, we have been just using things like this. We just create a museum, a library, to take care of the important things that we have been just creating. But that is not where we are just storing the information anymore. We are just basically using places like this. And there is nothing wrong with that, but there is one small point that could be interesting to think about. That is that they are just owned and controlled by private companies. And I would like to quote Bruce Sterling here, because I think there is a very clear view of what could happen in the future. Bruce Sterling said, there is a new phenomena that I like to call the stacks. And we have got, so far, 5 of them: Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft. The feature of the stacks is basically to take over the internet and render it irrelevant. None of them offer any prosperity or security to their human participants, except for their shareholders. The internet has users, but the stack people, are livestock ignorant of what is going on and moving from one stock to the other. And in order to be the stack, the one that is just prevailing, you have to implement the best policies to do so, like DRM, or closed formats, or restrictive licensing, or just difficulties to share your information. And all these guys are just basically creating that. And that is problematic today, but it's going to be even more damaging in the long term, in 100 years, because it's increasing the complexity to analyze and to review all this data. Another example and another point is that the companies are usually looking for profits, and that is totally right. That is what companies should be doing. But when they are not generating a clear profit, they usually stop just running the service. And that happened with GeoCities and Yahoo in 2009. Who knows what is GeoCities? Great. Well, GeoCities was one of the big places in the internet in 2000s. And it was probably the first contact that many people had with web publishing and web hosting. And to the very last day, they had 38 million personal websites. 38 million. What was the plan of Yahoo about the shutting down? Well, basically, they were just going to disconnect the servers and remove the data. There was no backup. There was no second opportunity. But the guys from the internet library, archive.org, they just jumped and they just created a backup that hopefully we can just hope that is going to be as complete as possible. But that was because a non-profit that was just working for preserving all this information was just fast enough just to create that backup, not because of the company wanted just to create that. And the argument sometimes goes like, but we don't have to worry about that because, they are too big to fail. Facebook is going to be with us forever. Apple is going to be with us forever. And I don't think that is true. I think that long-term preservation is not something natural. We have to take care of the information in order to preserve that. And it happens even with the biggest companies in the history. It was funny that in August 2012, Apple was the biggest company in history by market capitalization with $600 billion. So when you see all this huge amount of money, you can think like, well, there's no way these guys just go out of business. They're just going to be here for the long time. And even the headline was not real. The logo of the biggest company in history is this one. You know what it is? Anyone? No? Dutch East India Company. That is actually the biggest company in history. They were just basically the biggest fleet shipping goods from Europe to Asia in the 17th century. And it was actually the first company to go public in the stock trade. And they raised enough capital for 400 years to employ almost 70,000 people in a multinational conglomerate. That is quite impressive, 400 years ago. And they even suffered the first financial bubble, the tulip mania. The tulip mania, that was basically that the people were just irrationally speculating with the price of tulips. And obviously, it crashed like any other financial bubble. But in the end, 400 years after it was created, it was closed. It was closed because, they went into bankruptcy. So that is not true that, because we have a lot of money, we are just going to be here forever. But what about users? Just a few months ago, Facebook published that, we have 1 billion monthly active users now. And there were many news sites just publishing headlines like this, that Facebook is the 3rd largest country in the world. Well, apparently, they are not companies anymore. Suddenly, there are some kind of supranational identities. It's kind of like an empire. But if we look at history, even empires rise and fall. And they fail in the long term. Like, if you compare like Facebook today, there is 1 billion monthly active users, and the world population, you will have like almost 15% of the global population is using Facebook. Just compare that to the Roman Empire. That was 26%. Market share was better for the Roman Empire. And still, eventually, they fall. So there's no security that money or size is going to be something that helps you just to be here forever. Finally, I will just say that I think that mobile devices are just bringing huge opportunities to us, but we have to think about which ones they are and which ones are the dangers and the challenges that they are presenting at the same time. And we should care about our digital legacies in the same way that we care about our physical legacies. We have to create our own quipus for the future. And thank you very much for listening to me.